Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of Sloan the Record, recording on January 31st and publishing on February 9th, 2025. My name is Nathan Sloan, and I am joined again by my father, Ron. Each week, we're going on the record about family history, past and present. Along the way, we'll see if we can't learn more about the people, traditions, values, and stories that made us, all while opening a window for everyone else to see a slice of life in rural North Carolina. New episodes are published on Sundays, and we appreciate every listener. You can make sure that you catch each episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or the Podbean app. Just search Sloan the Record. Hi, Dad. How are you doing?
Doing great.
So this is the second week that we're recording a little early in case baby boy Sloan arrives, which could happen at any moment. Due date is Sunday, so that's just 2 days from when we're recording this. But it's looking potentially like it might be a little bit later, so it could be another week. But anyway, we're recording early to give me at least a week off after he gets here. Then we'll go back to recording and publishing on the same week. I'd also like to take just a second to mention that this is our 8th episode, which means when we finish up this recording, we will be exactly halfway through season 1 of the podcast. So we're making progress. If you're new to the show, feel free to jump back to episode 1 back in December and get yourself caught up. This week, we're doing a deep dive on Dad's journey to the big city of Greenville, which had to have been a pretty big city for somebody coming from the Mamers area. And this was, of course, to attend East Carolina University. That's where he eventually met my mother, Susan Searles. But that story, the story of their courtship and eventual marriage, is worthy of its own episode. So we're going to save that one for next time. Tonight, I want to hear about everything else that you have to share about the experience in college, or at least the parts that you can share without me having to tag this episode as adult only. So with that being said, to set the stage, tell us what year you moved to Greenville and then set the scene for us. What did the campus look like at ECU? What were some of the things that you noticed when you first got there that kind of seemed different or new to you? And beyond that, how would you describe the greater city of Greenville?
Well, I graduated high school in the late spring, early summer of 1968, and then was off to East Carolina that fall, the fall of 68. And I came from a high school where my graduating class had 45 people. The entire high school was probably less than 200. And I showed up at East Carolina with a class of 2,800 and a campus of over 10,000 students. And to say that I was overwhelmed is a great understatement. It was such a change.
Specifically, how did being around that number of people affect you?
Well, it was hard to take it in, all at one time, because you were just around, a few hundred at the time. But, you go into a class that would have more students sitting in it than I had when we had assembly in high school. And that would be like a history class. And it was kind of an unusual time in history. On top of that, it was kind of a complex time where different things were going on. It was, I think, the same year as Woodstock happened the summer before I went in. And to give you an idea, Woodstock was all over the place at East Carolina, the influence of it and everything else, with art and posters and everything else and music. But I didn't even know about Woodstock until I got down there. So that gives you a little bit of...
So it was fall of 1969?
Mm-hmm.
It was literally 69?
It was fall of 68.
Okay, well, I think, wasn't it summer of 69 was Woodstock? I could be misremembering that. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Well, I may have it confused too, but anyway, it was in that same period. I was thinking it was
August 15th to 18th, 1969 was the Woodstock Music.
69. Then it would have been when I came back in my sophomore year that was there. But the things that showed up at Woodstock were already showing up, I guess is the thing, at East Carolina. Even after getting there was a bit sheltered in that I kind of retreated into my little quarters. I didn't venture out a whole lot. And, I got to be friends with my roommate and some friends that he had there from high school. And, you pretty quickly formed a little core group of friends. And that made it feel more familiar. But
Who was your roommate? Was your roommate somebody from high school?
No. No one else from my high school went to East Carolina. It was just a random pick of the draw. They grouped art majors together. And my first roommate was Scott Harris from the town of Weldon up near Roanoke Rapids. Scott and I got along great and still do to this day. We haven't spent as much time, hadn't stayed in as close touch in the last 10 years than we did before. Since both of us have grandchildren, it kind of changed in your focus, and their daughter moved out of state, so they're gone quite a bit. But we were really close friends, and then the sophomore year, his best friend from high school transferred to East Carolina, and he wanted him to come in. We'd get in a suite, and he would room with him. And I had met another friend that was a commercial art major as well, and he was not happy in his rooming situation, or it wasn't relative to him. And so he and I decided to room together. That was Greg Ressler. Greg was from Sarasota, Florida, which is home of the Ringling School of Art and the Ringling Museum, and of course the Ringling Barnum Bailey Circus. But I came out of high school with never having had an art class. As I mentioned earlier, my mother was my only art teacher. And my roommate comes in, and he is that second year with Greg. He had spent time at Ringling and had friends that were curators at the museum, and he had taken courses in painting and silkscreen and drawing and all of these things. And I just, as I got in there in my freshman year, I felt really, really lost. And then as I got to know these other guys and the things that they were capable of and the things they'd already learned, I really felt like I was behind the eight ball. And
well, before we get into, I do want to talk a little bit more about your buddies later on, but you brought up something that I don't want to lose there, and that was you're the only person from your school that went to Greenville. Mm-hmm. So what is it about Greenville and ECU that drew you to that school?
It actually was pretty simple. I had a guidance counselor in high school, Miss Stewart, and the sweetest lady you could ever know. And she was friends with my parents. She had my brother ahead of me, and he was quite the scholar. And I think she kind of got me in there and said, what in the world can we do with him? Where can we send him that he might be able to apply himself? And of course, my abilities in drawing were pretty well known in a school as small as I went to. And so she immediately started talking to me about art school and said East Carolina has one of the top-rated art schools, is one of the top three on the East Coast. One in New York, and I can't remember where the other one was, but then East Carolina. And she said she introduced me to commercial art, and which was, doing art for business purposes. Which was really communication arts, in communicating for other people about products and so forth. So she pointed me in that direction, and my dad was was always helpful with things like that. Dad was never shy, and so the next thing I know, he has lined up an interview with Wellington Gray, who was Dr. Wellington Gray, who was the dean of the School of Art, and carried me down there and walked into the dean's office and introduced himself and me, and he had an appointment with him, and he was just kind of scary guy. He was a big, heavyset, dark guy, little pencil-thin mustache, and looked like he had to shave 3 times a day. I was pretty intimidated just then, but it was kind of a one-on-one, so I thought, hey, this is nice and personal, and and that was a little bit of a misgiving or a misdirection in a sense that, I thought I'd go back there and he'd say, well, hello, Ronald, how are you? And, but, when I got there, I realized I was one of thousands of students, and literally thousands in the art department. But that's how I ended up going there. It was sort of, I've joked about it was sort of by default. It was like the one thing they could find that I could do, so they sent me that direction.
Now, when you guys dropped me off to college, it's been 20 years, so I can't remember all of the details, and I'm sure it's even harder for you to try and take yourself back there. But I do remember some of the things from that first semester, and even right after you guys left, seeing you and Mom get misty-eyed and, oh, it's my last boy, sending him off to school, and just unpacked. And you probably met my roommate, Brett Roach, just really buff bodybuilder kind of guy.
It looked like
he wasn't a bodybuilder, but he was very athletic looking.
It looked like he'd be in a Beach Boys video to me.
Yeah, yeah. And he was a year older than me. He was a sophomore, so 19 instead of 18. And you guys, the initial shock to me, I guess, was growing up in a home where there was no alcohol, and I'd never drank in high school or anything. As soon as you and Mom left and the door closed, he pops open his mini fridge and cracks a beer and offers me one. And I was like, no, I can't drink a beer. But boy, was I in for a culture shock living with Roach. And it was a good one. I needed to have some kind of introduction to all of the adult things in life. And he definitely did that. And he also had rats. He had rats that he revealed to me that night because he had snakes. So he had to have the rats to feed the snakes. You're not supposed to have pets in the dorm. And here I was with a roommate that was underage drinking with rats and snakes in my room. And I'm, pretty much a little goody two-shoes. It's like, oh, no, I don't want to break the rules. But I had a roommate that was very much the opposite, but a very laid-back, cool guy. I didn't want to rat him out, pun not intended. So never did that. And that first semester was quiet. I went to several little extracurricular opportunities and pizza parties to try and meet people, and because I didn't have anybody from my high school that I knew when I went down there. So that first semester was really, I met a lot of people, but didn't have deep relationships with anyone. I was just trying to meet everybody that I possibly could. And I do have specific memories like that moment that you guys left and I first met Roach, and that's just what I called him, his last name. And so do you have any memories similar to that of just when you knew I'm not in Kansas anymore, something happened? Any vignettes into that time of your first semester?
Not as direct as yours, but that kind of thing was, it was everywhere. And you were getting, I guess the one thing that hit me the most direct introduction to stuff in terms of hitting that culture shock was that I started hearing about Rush. It's Rush. They're going to have Rush this week, and I didn't know what is Rush, and I didn't know what it was, and some of the guys were all excited about, that, and they were going to rush Kappa Alpha, and they were going to rush this and that. It was, of course, the fraternities, which were, the social centers, the party centers of the place. You had a few that were academic fraternities, but they were by far the minority. And the TEECs and the KAs were the ones that seemed to be the ones that were most prominent. And of course, we kind of, as you got to know guys, you kind of stuck together. You tended to kind of go with the herd mentality of being safer in a strange place if you were with other people. We would head out, and if one or two of them wanted to go to a rush party, we'd all go. And so, going into down on 5th Street, they had all of these grand old homes from Greenville that had been purchased and turned into fraternity houses and sorority houses. And I'd never seen so many good-looking girls in my life. And probably the first time I had seen beautiful girls drunk as monkeys, too. And I didn't know what to think of that. I'd never seen... Only drunks I'd seen had been sort of like Otis.
The town drunk.
The town drunk. Everybody knew sort of where he was going to be and all. And, here were well-dressed, refined-looking girls that were just looked like fools, you were just like, it was kind of shocking because I'd always had this, I guess I put women too much on a pedestal as being just something to be admired and desired and wished for, but always kind of out of reach and not being quite good enough to meet up with our standards. And here were these girls kind of, going the opposite way. So that was probably my first real introduction, was going from one of these places to the other. And so
that's fraternity parties?
Mm-hmm. And, of course, then you go in there, and there was some guy that wanted to get right up in your face to talk to you about, man, you guys, this is great. It's great, man. You'll love it, man. You guys, this is where you need to be. They were trying to be really serious, and we're just, they were just messed up. And then you see people passed out, of course, loud music, and a whole new world for me. That's probably the thing that stands out the most in my mind. And then,
you didn't have a car, right?
No, I didn't have a car.
So I asked earlier what you knew of the rest of the city of Greenville outside of the campus, but did you even really get to go to the rest of the city of Greenville if you didn't have a car?
Well, we always found somebody that had a car. And some of the freshmen weren't supposed to have cars. But there were, friends that had cars, and they didn't register them on campus. They would keep them off campus. They would find somewhere that they could keep them during the week that wasn't too far away, go get their car, and then come back and pick us up, and we'd go places. But I didn't have a whole lot of that my freshman year. I was just, one or two guys. But I didn't have the other thing, I kind of felt sorry for my parents because my brother was in college at Pfeiffer going to pre-dental school. And that was a private school. It was expensive. And, of course, he had gotten scholarships and things, but I didn't have any scholarships. And I was very aware of the cost of things. And getting down there, the little money I had saved up working in the transportation garage at Lillington before I headed out down there didn't go too far. And aside from tuition and books, which everybody had to buy a tremendous amount of art supplies, sketch pads and paints and pencils and inks and Japanese brushes and things I'd never seen but had to have to take the classes. And the art books were always real expensive because they had so many color plates in them at that time. is what they call it when they'd have certain pages that were printed in color and inserted into it.
So you didn't want to go out and do things because you didn't want to spend money.
Yeah, I didn't have the money to go, and of course I didn't have the dumbest thing I did was not ask for a meal ticket, to the cafeteria, because I saw how much that was for a quarter, and I was like, well, I can get by. They'd give me some money, like $25 to spend for the week or something like that. And back then, that was like having $250 in your pocket, it seems like now. But it didn't always cover it. I thought I would never eat another Vienna sausage. But, I'd go back to my room at lunch. That was always where you kind of retreat to when you're in that freshman fall quarter. You're homesick and kind of scared of, what you're going to be able to do and how well you do. And I get Zesta crackers and a thing of mustard, which didn't have to be refrigerated. And I'd split Vienna sausages, lay them face down on a cracker square and put mustard on it. And, that'd be lunch.
When you're holed up in your room, when I was in college, 2004, 5, 6, 7, I would also hold up in my room sometimes, but I had video games and a computer. Yeah, I had access to the internet and could do things like that. What are you doing? Are you just reading in your room? What are you doing to entertain yourself?
Well, mostly entertainment was each other. And if you didn't have anything to do, you'd walk down the hall and see where 2 or 3 guys were gathered in a room. You go in, plop down on the bed, and start talking. And Greg Russler and I had lunch today, and we were talking about that freshman year. He was down the hall and down a side wing from me, and I'd see him in classes and everything. It was a long time before I knew he was only about probably 40, 50 feet from me in the dorm, but he was at the end of a wing that had a staircase, so he never came down our way. So I didn't see him in the dorm, and then one day we were talking on campus, and he was talking about his situation. Then when Scott came, and talked to me, we worked it out. But we were talking about the different people on that hall, and talking about the things that you were not used to or you didn't even know existed. Really, there was this one guy that was was a really buff guy. Really nice looking. He looked kind of like one of the Allman Brothers. He had blonde hair down, to his rib cage, long blonde hair, and pretty cool clothes. And, he was older than us. But what really got our attention, that I believe that was the year, it was one of my years at East Carolina, that Easy Rider came out. And the Peter Fonda had this stretched out custom motorcycle with a teardrop tank with the stars and stripes on it. Everybody's familiar with that movie, I'm sure. But it was kind of one of those coming-of-age movies. And we're coming up the hill one day, me and a buddy, and we see this bike that looked even wilder than the Easy Rider bike out there beside our dorm. And it was all stretched out with extended forks and everything. And you could hear it when it cranked up. We'd look out our window to see who it was, and it was that blonde-headed guy. And one day, about this time of year, he came up to my room, and he said, "Hey, you the guy that does the portraits?" And I said, or somebody told me you're the guy that does portraits. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, come down here, I want to talk to you." And I go down to his room, and he's got all kinds of stuff in there, but over in the corner hanging on this stand was this leather vest that was really worn and had all kinds of insignias and stuff embroidered on it and everything. It was an outlaw motorcycle gang. And he was turns out they're sort of like a business operation. And he was the sergeant at arms, the muscle for that bike gang. And they had been run out of Florida.
He was in your dorm room?
And he was in my dorm. Yeah, right down the hall from me. They had been run out of Florida and relocated to Durham, North Carolina. And they were run out of Florida because one of the women all had jobs like worked in banks and all those kinds of things. And they made the money and came in and turned their checks over to their old man. And the guys didn't work. But this girl, I found out later.
But did get a college education? But they didn't work, but they did get a college education?
Well, this guy was getting a college education because he was supposed to take over the business operation. He was getting a business degree, of what they were doing. And
so he wanted a portrait in his vest or something?
He wanted a portrait of his girlfriend because Valentine's was coming up, or he called her his old lady. And that's what he wanted to talk to me about. And so he takes me down in his room and I see all this stuff. And then some of my buddies wanted to go down there and talk to him with me. So when I went back with something, they went with me. And then they started asking him questions. And he starts talking about the things that they did, the initiations to the club, and what these different insignias on his colors is what he called it. What they meant and what they had to do to earn that insignia. And, one of them, was, well, some of them I don't even want to say, but, it involved killing people, being, in gunfights or knife fights or whatever like that. And then I got scared. I mean, I really got worried because I thought, anybody do this stuff is mentally ill. It was still fascinating, because it was like, it'd be like having an alien encounter with somebody to come from where I lived and the people that I knew to encountering somebody like that. So it was a time of eye-opening to a lot of things I never heard of or seen or whatever. I didn't know anything about marijuana, but it soon became a fragrance I was very familiar with. And, even in the classrooms, people go down in the stairwells and smoke. You walk in the stairwell and think, well, I want to be high by the time I get downstairs. But,
well, college, I guess, it sounds like that's one way that it hasn't changed, is that it is where people go to have their horizons expanded, not only through classes and what they learn, but, as you say, meeting people from all walks of life that you may not otherwise meet. So,
yeah, and learning to get along with them. And I think I told somebody one time one of the most valuable things about college to me was that it forced me out of my shell, and I had to learn to deal with people that were very different from me and get along with them. People from areas way different from where I grew up, with cultures way different from my culture, and values very different from my. And then, I realized that was a great preparation for going out into the workplace, because when you go out and start a career, you're not going to be dealing with the guy down the road. You're dealing with people from other places, different cultures. It's a good thing from that standpoint, because when you can learn to communicate with people that are so different from you in different backgrounds and become friends with them, then you're getting more tools in your toolbox than just what you're trying to get for your major. You're getting tools to deal with life and other people in life, and so it was a positive thing, but it was intimidating. And one of the hardest things for me was just being lonely.
I was going to ask, that was my next question was, did you have homesickness? Did you have a freshman year period where you were just bummed out?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had a lot of homesickness, especially, if the guys I knew were gone somewhere or, had dates or, went home. And I was down there. The weekends were really tough. But,
How often would you go home?
It seems like to start with, you had to stay down there for like 6 weeks. They did not want you to go home because apparently in the past people had not come back, Mm-hmm. And so you were supposed to go through a period like that. And of course, I had no way to go home. In fact, I arrived at East Carolina riding with somebody else that came and took my stuff that was going down there because Dad had, the car on the mail route. And my mother would have had to have driven me. So that...
so you're there at least 6 weeks, but then what was it? Maybe once a month after that or every 2 months?
I started going home probably if I could find a ride home. A lot of guys hitchhiked. And I had one friend who was married, a guy from Lillington that I met and got to be good friends with him. And he was actually married at 18. And he went home every weekend. And so sometimes, depending on who he was riding with, sometimes he'd hitchhike to get home. I never tried to hitchhike home. I hitchhiked around town, especially if I was out and it was raining. But those were not always good experiences either. But, as I got to know more people, I would catch rides. And then the other thing that kind of made a difference was my brother's future wife was down there. I didn't know her well, beforehand. They were dating, serious, steady dating. He was at Pfeiffer, but if he came home, she'd try to go home. And she had a car, but she was over on the other end of the campus from me, probably a couple of miles. But sometimes, I shouldn't even tell this. I sound so pathetic, but sometimes I would, when I would just get really lonely, heartsick, lonely, I'd walk over there to her dorm and sit out on the front porch and felt like I was close to somebody from home, And then I'd catch rides with her sometimes to come home and to get back. But she was a senior and didn't come home, as much. And
that was when you were a freshman?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was there 1 year.
Well, moving beyond your freshman year, when do you feel like you ever got to the point where you kind of were over the whole loneliness spell and you made enough friends?
Oh yeah, yeah. I made a lot of friends and I got over that, and it just took a little time, and of course there were no cell phones. The only way to call home was a phone booth at the end of the hall, and it cost, I forget how much it was. You'd have to drop in a quarter, and then it was a dime every now and then. They'd come on and say, deposit another dime, if you talked long. Mm-hmm. But most of the time I would make a collect call if I called home. They didn't go too long either. But the other thing that I remember, and was probably a big mistake, was I had a girlfriend at home. She was from Coates. And I just had in my mind that she was the only girl in the world, I just had blinders on. So I wasn't interested in meeting girls because I was true blue. And I'd come out of class, go back to my dorm.
Is this the one that was C?
No, this one was in Coates. She was still in high school. She was actually the sister of my cousin's wife, Tim Spence. And I just thought the world of his wife. I thought she was the sweetest thing. She looked like Mary Tyler Moore and was just as sweet as Mary Tyler Moore. She's one of those rare people at her age that didn't ignore younger kids. She made just a huge impression on me. And then when I found out she had a sister, I was really interested in that. And we started dating. And but I would write her every single day. I'd draw things and send them to her. Just sitting there, which was terrible for me. It was just like digging my hole deeper and deeper, in terms of secluding myself. And, but, I would sit in there and draw and do something and send it to her. But we ended up, she wasn't interested in maintaining a long distance relationship. And so it was all for naught. I ended up, going through that then, getting my heart broken there at an early year and having to recover from that. But pretty soon school got serious enough and I started getting exposed to stuff I'd never done before, and that helped a lot. And then I was on the financial aid program, and they found me my freshman year a job on campus at the Regional Development Institute. And then one of the things that changed was, I guess it was my winter quarter, I went to work at the Regional Development Institute, which was on 5th Street over there between the fraternity and sorority houses. They put me in there because it was relative to my major, in that they helped market ideas for people in the eastern part of the state doing economic development for the eastern part of the state. And if a company, wanted to start a business, they would help them. And then they found out I was, put me there because I was commercial art, and they'd need brochures done. They would need logos and things like that. So I got way ahead of my class in some senses because I was preparing jobs and getting them printed when they were learning just the simple layouts of how to lay out jobs and how to prepare camera-ready art. And I was leaving class and going and putting it to use and building these things. So that was hard in that I had to go over there to work every hour I wasn't in class till 5 o'clock.
Starting what year? Sophomore year, junior year?
That was my, I think it was either the winter or spring quarter of my freshman year.
And you did it all throughout college, or just
I did it all the way through. Every quarter, I worked there with the Regional Development Institute.
And how was it again that you got hooked up with that job?
The financial aid department. Okay. When I applied for financial aid, they give you loans. Mm-hmm. Some, depending on what you're doing, like if you were teaching, they would give you, I forget what it was called, if it was fellowships or something, where you agreed to teach in North Carolina for a certain period of time. And but I didn't have anything like that for what I was doing. They didn't offer that, but the other thing they did offer was finding you a job, hopefully work study, like thing related to your major. Yeah. If you had been industrial arts, they would have tried to gotten you a job with a manufacturing company, to go to, or machinist or something like that. But it was a good thing for me because one, it kept me busy. Two, it gave me money. And
you didn't have to eat Vienna sausages and saltines all the time.
I was able to wean off of the Vienna sausages. I know one of the things I did food-wise that was crazy was my dad used to buy these Pet Ritz ice cream pies. And they weren't very big, so, he divided up with a house with 4 kids and 2 parents, and, you get this little slice of pie. There was strawberry, there were lemon and so forth, and they had the little cream, like whipped cream toppings on them. And I thought those things were so good, and I never got all I wanted. And when I got a little bit of money, we'd go out and go down to the Zip Mart and grocery shop at the stuff that we could bring back to the room. And it was usually getting canned things that you could heat up. There weren't
You didn't
no
have a mini
microwaves.
fridge?
Didn't have a mini fridge at that time, and they wouldn't allow you to cook in the rooms, but they would allow you to have popcorn popper. So we found out we could make soup and Bush's baked beans and all this stuff in the popcorn popper. And so we became chefs of the popcorn popper instead of the grill master, or whatever. We were the popcorn popper masters. And you wouldn't believe
Are there parts of campus that were very meaningful to you, or that you just thought were especially memorable or beautiful? Like for me, there's Chancellor's Walk at UNC Wilmington. It's just long, parallel sidewalks that pretty much everybody has to go on when they're going to and from classes. And there's a big clock tower at one end and the dining hall at the other end. And that's one spot that I would always remember. Are there spots like that you have on campus? And
to finish the thing on the ice cream pie, I bought one and decided I was going to eat for one time in my life all I wanted. And I ate a whole Pet Ritz ice cream pie. And I think that's when I discovered I was lactose intolerant. In terms of the campus, Wright Auditorium was sort of the center of campus. They had a circle out in front of it with a big fountain, and it had these huge columns, that took it up, and that's when a lot of the concerts and things that I went to, and that was another way of broadening my world, was the entertainment and the things I got to see. I'd never been to a concert, and I saw everybody from. While I was there, there wasn't hardly a group that was out there that I didn't see. The Fifth Dimension, the Allman Brothers Band, Gary Puckett and Union Gap. One of the best I went to was in Wright Auditorium, is what made me think of those, and it was the Earl Scruggs Review, Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. And I didn't think it was going to be a big hit, but I don't remember which year it was, but it was one of the best concerts I ever went to in terms of interacting with the people at the concert, because it was a really small venue. It was in that auditorium, which is about the size of Hatchet Castle. Mm-hmm. And he actually talked to people, and he would ask about something, you got a song you want to hear, and the people were so responsive that he actually got kind of emotional about it and said, I don't think he was expecting to have that kind of reception, with his music of another genre, a different generation even, And he said, I've never had an audience respond like this, and thanked us for how how everybody was, and it was kind of,
was it?
They were kind of bluegrass folk music, okay. But I guess part of that was it was kind of there were some singers out there that were kind of following and pulling off of their genre, like Joni Mitchell and different ones that were reminiscent. Of that music, and it was sort of like these people that love that music were getting to hear the roots where it came from, real authenticity. And
so he just felt like the thing that he'd been doing for all these years was getting appreciated by a whole nother generation.
Another generation, and he got emotional at one point, had a hard time really talking, and I think it's because he had probably dreaded the thing, And then he got there, and it was a really sweet experience. And I also saw B.B. King for the first time at Wright Auditorium, and that broadened my world like crazy to hear, this blues and this unbelievable guitar work and so forth. And I remember one of the most outstanding things with the Scruggs Review was his son, Randy Scruggs, was there, and he played an acoustic solo. And that room was so quiet, you could hear his fingers slide fretting, zzz, zzz, you could hear it zip on the texture of those strings as he was playing it. It was that quiet in there. That's still one of those moments I'd like to go back and relive because it was just one of those mountaintop experiences.
Real quick, we only have time for one. I know you probably had multiple classes, multiple professors, but if you could only pick one class or professor that had the greatest impact on you, what was it, who was it, and why?
Wow. Of course, in my art classes, I would say it was Wes Crawley. And one other one, hold on a minute. If I'd have known that, I could have gotten his name in my head. He was this elderly man. He had Francis. I'm almost there. You can go to the museum, North Carolina Museum of Art, and they have his stuff all over in there, his paintings. Wonderful, wonderful elderly man. He was the artist emeritus. He had a title there at the university because of he was so well known. But he taught figure drawing to me.
Well, if you think of his name later, we'll add his name to the show notes.
But he had a huge, I'm embarrassed that I can't think of his name because it usually rolls right off of my tongue when I talk about him. But he was very personable. He reminded me of the poet that wrote, the North Carolina poet that did the poem, The Road Less Traveled.
Robert Frost was
Robert Frost.
North Carolinian?
I think he was. But he reminded me of Robert Frost. He had this thick white hair. His face looked a lot like Jimmy Stewart when Jimmy got older. And he always wore a kind of a dark charcoal suit coat and a vest, like a sweater vest, and a little thin tie, like a bow tie, like a string tie type thing. And sometimes he'd have a regular tie, but it was always a little thin tie. And very soft-spoken, very, very quiet. His work just blew me away. And he did scenes that I was familiar with. The things he loved to paint were tobacco barns, dairy farms, and old houses that were beyond their prime. He would go out and find these country scenes and paint them. And I don't think I've got time to tell a story about him with interacting with me or not. You'd have to tell me. I doubt it.
Probably not at this point, but just what was the major takeaway from him? Why do you think that that was such a valuable experience? In a few words.
Well, he took time with each of us to, come up to where you were drawing and talk to you. And the story that I would tell was one day he came up and in a nutshell, he scared me because he asked where I'd been and where I'd studied before. And I was embarrassed because I had never had a lesson of any type. And then he said to me, "I'm afraid I can't help you." And I thought he meant I was beyond help. And I saw the girl behind him put her hand over her mouth, like, oh God, and like she felt so sorry for me. And he said, "What you are doing cannot be taught. It is a gift." And he said, "All I can do is encourage you." And he took me from thinking there in just a couple of minutes that I probably should leave school to having the strongest compliment I could have from one of the people that I admired the most. And through the rest of that semester, he took a lot of interest in the technique that I was using. I was drawing with vine charcoal, doing figure drawings. That was probably one of the most impactful things because I felt so inferior to these other people who had studied art all through high school and, had things. And then Wes Crawley was another figure drawing instructor that was also a sculptor. And I loved his work. But he was just like an average guy, just nice, quiet, real intense guy. But he really could teach you and wanted to teach you. And I learned a lot from him.
When you dropped me off for college as a freshman, or right before we went to the dorm room, or at some point we went to the campus store and I got a UNCW sticker, and it was one of the last things you did. You helped me put it on the back of the Explorer that I had as my car at that point in time. And it was one of those proud dad, hands on the shoulders, I'm so excited for you. And you said, these are going to be some of the best days of your life. I'm excited for you. And you get a sense there that you're remembering those days for yourself. Why did you say that at that time? Why would you have said those are some of the best days of your life?
I wanted you not to be apprehensive. I didn't want you to have the fears that I had. I didn't want you to, I wanted you to look forward to it instead of looking forward to the next weekend you could go home. I wanted you to realize that positive things were going to come out of it, and you were going to enjoy it, and it was going to be the friendships that would last the longest. It was going to be the memories that were the deepest. I came out of East Carolina. I dreaded leaving because I could do anything in that town. And I said, I'll never live in a town where there's not a college, because it just brought so much to you culturally. Things that opportunities to do so much. There was always an art show or a film festival or something to go and see and do. And, it was just so exciting for me. And then, I ended up my first job in Fayetteville, and it was so different from Greenville. But Greenville, the campus was open and beautiful. We had a huge arboretum that was right out from Wright Auditorium, just this huge area with giant oak trees on it, and all around it were dorms and the library and the classrooms and things, and walks that went under those shady trees. And it was just such a different experience. Like you talked about, the places you saw, and these trees were so old, were just so huge. And I said that to you because I knew it was going to be such a change for you, and change is not easy. And I thought, if I can show you a little light at the end of the tunnel, it'll help you get through those times like that, and maybe get you to look for what I was talking about. Seeing that light at the end of the tunnel, or the rainbow after the cloud.
Get through those first 6 months to get to the point where you actually start feeling a part of the community, feeling like you're plugged in, and reaping the benefits of all of the things that college has to offer that we've been talking about. So,
if you recall, I told you all your life, or maybe not all your life, but in a lot of parts, that the most valuable things you can accumulate are memories and relationships. I don't know if you remember me telling you that or not. I've told all of you kids that at one time or the other, because they're the things that can't be taken away from you. And I think after, like you said, about 3 months, you start realizing you're doing that. You're building relationships, and you're already making memories. You're coming home and sharing stuff with your friends that happened at college, and, and with your parents and things like that, and funny stories and such.
And hey, you had lunch with one of your college roommates today, so you're right. Yeah. There is a good chance you meet lifelong friends. You're married to somebody that you met at college. For me, I still have good friends from those college days myself. So on the whole, college, good experience. You learn a lot in class, and you learn probably even more out of class. And so, yeah, that's some of those stories I've never heard. Appreciate you sharing them. We're going to wrap the episode up here with no further discussion of the current goings on or entertainment or anything, but we will pick up next week talking about that relationship with Susan Searles. So, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.